It was a Friday night and I was driving back home after visiting my parents. They live in a small town about 3 hours away from my place. I had left their house pretty late because I stayed for dinner. It was around 11 p.m. when I started the drive back, and I knew it would be a long dark drive through mostly empty roads and small towns. I was about halfway home when I noticed my gas gauge was getting dangerously low. The road was pitch black and I hadn't seen another car in what felt like forever. I started to get that sinking feeling in my stomach, worrying that I might end up stranded in the middle of nowhere. I kept driving, hoping to find a gas station soon. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally saw the dim flickering lights of a gas station up ahead. I breathed a sigh of relief and pulled in. It was one of those old rundown places that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, and there was only one pump. But at that moment, it felt like a godsend. I parked my car next to the pump and got out. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, and a little bell above it jingled. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, casting a sickly yellow glow over everything. There was an old man behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up when I came in, giving me a tired nod. "Need some gas?" he asked in a gravelly voice. "Yeah, and maybe a drink," I replied, heading over to the coolers to grab a soda. As I walked through the aisles, I noticed how outdated everything looked. The shelves were sparsely stocked, and what was there looked like it had been sitting there for years. I grabbed a soda and a bag of chips and went to the counter. The old man rang up my items and handed me the key for the pump. He said, "Pump it yourself," before going back to his newspaper. As I was pumping the gas, I felt a strange sense of unease. It was so quiet, and the darkness seemed to press in on all sides. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the light cast by the gas station. It was a man, just standing there, watching me. I felt my heart start to race. I tried to ignore him, focusing on the pump and willing the gas to flow faster. When I glanced back up, he was still there, closer now. His face was shadowed, but I could tell he was staring straight at me. I finished pumping the gas as quickly as I could and got back into my car. Just as I was about to merge back onto the road, I saw him again. This time he was standing directly in front of my car, illuminated by my headlights. His face was pale and his eyes were wide and unblinking. I froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He raised one hand and pointed at me, then slowly drew his thumb across his throat. My blood ran cold. I slammed on the gas, swerving to avoid him and speeding out of the gas station. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I drove for a few miles, trying to put as much distance between myself and that creepy gas station as possible. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that man chasing after me, but the road behind me was empty. I finally started to calm down, telling myself it was probably just some weirdo trying to scare me. But then, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. A car was coming up fast behind me. My heart started to race again as the car got closer and closer. It was an old beat-up pickup truck and it was tailgating me. I tried to speed up, but the truck matched my pace. I switched lanes and so did the truck. No matter what I did, I couldn't shake it. I was starting to panic, wondering what the hell this guy wanted. Suddenly the truck swerved into the other lane and pulled up alongside me. I glanced over and saw the same man from the gas station behind the wheel. His face was twisted into a sinister grin, and his eyes were locked onto mine. He swerved the truck towards me, trying to run me off the road. I jerked the wheel, narrowly avoiding a collision. I could see his lips moving, but I couldn't hear what he was saying over the roar of the wind in the engine. It looked like he was laughing. I knew I had to get away from him. I floored the gas pedal, pushing my car as fast as it would go. The truck kept pace for a while, but eventually, I started to pull ahead. I kept glancing back, praying he would give up and leave me alone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the truck started to fall behind. I watched as its headlights grew smaller and smaller in my rearview mirror until they finally disappeared. I didn't slow down though. I kept driving as fast as I could until I reached the next town. I pulled into a well-lit, busy gas station and parked my car. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath and calm down. My hands were still shaking and I felt like I might throw up. I glanced around, making sure I wasn't being followed. After a few minutes, I decided to go inside and call the police. I figured it was worth reporting, even if they couldn't do much. I walked into the convenience store and told the clerk what had happened. He let me use the phone, and I called the local police department. The officer who answered sounded bored and uninterested, but he took my information and said he'd send a patrol car to check out the gas station. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a little better knowing that at least someone knew what had happened. I grabbed another soda and some more snacks before heading back to my car. I still had about an hour's drive ahead of me, but I felt a little more secure now that I was in a busy, well-lit area. As I got back on the road, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that truck again, but the rest of the drive was uneventful, and I finally made it home safe and sound. The whole experience left me shaken, and it took me a long time to feel comfortable driving alone at night again. I never found out who that man was or what his deal was. The police never got back to me, and as far as I know, they never found him. I had just finished a late shift at work and I was dead tired. I work as a delivery driver, so I spend a lot of time on the road. Anyway, I was driving home on this long, dark stretch of highway when I realized I was running low on gas. Like really low. I was kind of freaking out because I hadn't seen a gas station for miles, and my car was starting to make that chugging sound it does when it's about to give up. Finally, I saw this old rundown gas station up ahead. It was the only one around and I was desperate, so I pulled in. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s, but I didn't care. I just needed gas. There were a couple of pumps, but only one looked like it might work. The lights inside the little convenience store part were on, but there was no sign of anyone inside. I got out of the car and started pumping gas. The whole time I had this weird feeling like I was being watched. But I figured I was just being paranoid. It was late, I was tired, and the place was creepy. I kept looking around expecting someone to pop out, but it was just empty. There was this old car parked on the side, covered in dust and looking like it hadn't moved in years. That didn't help the whole creepy vibe. Once I had enough gas to get home, I went inside to pay. The door creaked loudly when I pushed it open, and this bell above it rang, but still, no one came out. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. I walked up to the counter and saw a little bell, so I rang it a couple of times. Nothing. The place was a mess. Shelves were half empty and there was dust everywhere. It didn't look like anyone had cleaned up in a long time. I started to think maybe the place was abandoned or something, but the lights were on, and there was this faint hum from the old fridge in the back. I felt weird just standing there, so I walked around a bit, hoping someone would show up. As I wandered through the aisles, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then, I noticed this door at the back of the store. It was slightly open and there was a dim light coming from inside. I figured maybe the clerk was back there taking a break or something, so I walked over and pushed the door open a bit more. Inside, there was this small, cluttered office. Papers were scattered all over the desk, and there was this ancient-looking computer in the corner. But what really caught my attention was the wall. It was covered in photos, hundreds of them, all pinned up in a chaotic mess. I stepped closer and realized they were all pictures of people. Some looked like they were taken in the store, while others were from outside, at the pumps or around the parking lot. The more I looked, the more uneasy I felt. A lot of the photos were of different people, but there were a few that showed the same faces in different places, almost like someone had been following them, and then I saw it. My heart practically stopped. There, near the center of the wall, was a photo of me. It was taken from behind as I was pumping gas just a few minutes earlier. I hadn't seen or heard anyone, and I hadn't noticed a camera. My mind was racing. Who took this picture, and why? And I was about to bolt out of there when I heard a noise behind me. I turned around and this guy was standing in the doorway. He was tall and thin, with greasy hair and these hollow, sunken eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He asked, "Can I help you?" in this flat, monotone voice. I stammered something about needing to pay for gas, and he just stared at me for a few seconds before finally moving to the register. I followed him out, trying to act normal, but my heart was pounding. He rang me up without saying another word, and I practically threw the money at him before rushing out the door. As I got into my car, I glanced back and saw him standing in the doorway, watching me. I didn't waste any time getting out of there. I drove way too fast down that dark highway, constantly checking my rearview mirror to make sure I wasn't being followed. I didn't see any headlights, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. When I finally got home, I parked in the garage and just sat in my car for a while, trying to calm down. I kept thinking about those photos and that guy. Why did he have a picture of me? Who were all those other people? I wanted to call the police, but what would I even say? Hi, I found a creepy photo of myself at this old gas station. It sounded insane. Over the next few days, I tried to put it out of my mind, but it wasn't easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that wall of photos. I started avoiding that highway, even though it added extra time to my commute. I couldn't bring myself to go back to that gas station. A couple of weeks later, I was out with some friends and we were talking about weird things that had happened to us. I decided to share my story, half expecting them to laugh it off. But when I mentioned the gas station, one of my friends, Jake, got this serious look on his face. "Dude, are you talking about that place off Route 46? I nodded, and he leaned in closer. "I've heard about that place. My cousin went there once, late at night. He said it was super creepy, and the guy working there gave him the chills. He saw the photos too, but get this. When he went back during the day, the place was completely boarded up. Like no one had been there in years. My blood ran cold. How could that be? I was just there. I saw the guy, I paid for gas. Jake swore his cousin was telling the truth, and now I didn't know what to think. It made no sense. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. I decided I needed answers. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove back out to the gas station. It was daylight, and I hoped that would make things feel less eerie. When I got there, my heart sank. Just like Jake said, the place was boarded up. The pumps were gone, and the windows were covered with plywood. I got out of my car and walked around trying to find some sign of life, but it looked like no one had been there in ages. Weeds were growing through the cracks in the pavement, and the old car was still there, rusted and abandoned. I don't know what I expected to find, but it wasn't this. I peeked through a gap in the boards covering the door, but it was too dark to see anything inside. The place felt completely different from the night I was there. It was like I had stepped into some alternate reality. I was about to leave when I noticed something on the ground near the door. It was a small, dusty photo. I picked it up and brushed it off, and my heart skipped a beat. It was the same photo of me pumping gas, the one I saw on the wall inside. I flipped it over, but there was nothing written on the back. I didn't stick around to investigate any further. I got back in my car and drove home, feeling more confused than ever. To this day, I don't know what to make of it. I've tried to find out more about that gas station, but there's nothing online. It's like it doesn't exist.
My name's James, and I used to work the night shift at a gas station out in the middle of nowhere. This was years ago, and I've since moved on to a different job in a different town. But what happened there still haunts me to this day. Not in a ghostly way, but more in a I can't believe that actually happened kind of way. I took the job because I needed the money. It wasn't a glamorous job by any means. The gas station was off a lonely highway about 10 miles from the nearest town. It was small, just 2 pumps and a little store. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most nights it was pretty dead. I'd see maybe 1 or 2 cars an hour, sometimes none at all. My boss was this old guy named Carl. He was nice enough, but he didn't talk much. He'd show up around 5:45 a.m. to relieve me and then head off to do whatever it was he did during the day. He'd hired me because I was reliable and didn't mind the isolation. Plus, I could use the extra cash, so it worked out for both of us. It was around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when things started getting weird. I remember because it was dead quiet and I was reading some old magazine to pass the time. The sound of a car pulling up to the pump broke the silence, which was unusual at that hour. I looked up and saw an old beat-up truck. It looked like it had been through hell and back. Rust covered most of the body and the headlights were dim, barely illuminating the ground in front of it. A guy got out and something about him just felt off. He was tall and thin, with greasy hair that hung in his face. He wore a dirty flannel shirt and jeans that were torn at the knees. As he walked toward the door, I got this weird feeling in my stomach, like something bad was about to happen. About 10 minutes passed and he still hadn't come out. I started to get a little nervous. I knocked on the door and asked if he was okay. No response. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I tried the door, but it was locked. I went back to the counter and considered calling Carl, but it was late, and I didn't want to bother him if it was nothing. Another 10 minutes passed, and I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I grabbed the keys from under the counter and went back to the bathroom. My hand was shaking as I unlocked the door. When it finally swung open, I was greeted by an empty room. The window was open, and the guy was gone. I looked outside but didn't see him anywhere. I went back inside and decided to check the security footage.
We had a couple of cameras, one covering the pumps and another inside the store. I rewound the footage to the moment the guy arrived. There he was, getting out of the truck and heading to the bathroom. I fast-forwarded to when I knocked on the door, then to when I unlocked it. The whole time, the guy never left the bathroom. He just disappeared. I was officially freaked out. I called Carl and told him what happened. He was half asleep and didn't seem too concerned. He told me to lock up and head home, and he'd check things out in the morning. I didn't argue. I was more than happy to get out of there. The next night, I was on edge. I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to make sense of it all. Around 1 a.m., another car pulled up. This time it was a sleek black sedan. A woman got out, looking just as out of place as the guy from the night before. She was dressed in a business suit, which was weird considering the location and time. She walked in, made eye contact with me and smiled. But there was something off about her smile. It didn't reach her eyes. She asked, "Can I use your bathroom?" Her voice was calm, almost too calm. I said, "Sure," handing her the key. "Just bring it back when you're done." She took the key and headed to the bathroom. I watched her go, every nerve in my body on high alert. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I knocked on the door, but there was no response. My heart was pounding as I unlocked the door. Just like the night before, the bathroom was empty. The window was open, and the woman was gone. I ran outside, looked around, but there was no sign of her. I checked the footage again, and it was the same story. She entered the bathroom and never came out. This time I didn't bother calling Carl. I just locked up and went home. I couldn't explain what was happening, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. The next morning, Carl called me. He sounded more awake this time and definitely more concerned. He said he'd looked at the footage and didn't have any explanation for what was happening. He told me to take the night off and that he'd cover the shift himself. I didn't argue. I needed a break. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I spent the day trying to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting back to the gas station and those two people who had vanished. The following night, I got a call from Carl around midnight. His voice was shaky, and I could hear the fear in it. "Mike, I need you to come down here," he said. "Now." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and drove to the gas station as fast as I could. When I arrived, I found Carl standing outside, looking pale and terrified. He didn't say anything, just pointed to the store. I went inside and saw a man lying on the floor, covered in blood. He was alive, but barely. His breathing was shallow and his eyes were wide with fear. I knelt down beside him and tried to get him to talk, but he just kept muttering the same thing over and over. "They're coming! They're coming!" I looked up at Carl, but he didn't have any answers. We called 911 and an ambulance arrived within minutes. They took the man to the hospital, but I never found out what happened to him. He just disappeared like the others. After that night, I quit my job at the gas station. I couldn't handle the fear and uncertainty anymore. Carl closed the place down a few weeks later. He couldn't find anyone willing to work the night shift, and he wasn't about to do it himself. I moved to a new town and started over, but I still think about those nights at the gas station. I was driving late one night, heading back home from a friend's place. The road was empty, just me and the dark stretches of asphalt under the dim glow of my headlights. I hadn't seen another car for miles, and the only signs of life were the occasional flickering streetlights that seemed to fight against the darkness. As I drove, my gas gauge started to dip closer and closer to empty. I cursed under my breath, realizing I should have stopped at the last gas station I saw. But now, I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but trees and darkness. Just when I was starting to worry if I would make it to the next town, I saw a sign up ahead, "Gas station, 5 miles." Relief washed over me as I pressed down on the gas pedal, eager to reach the station before my car sputtered to a stop. The miles seemed to drag on, each one feeling longer than the last. I kept my eyes glued to the road, searching for any sign of the gas station. Finally, I saw the glow of fluorescent lights up ahead, and my heart leaped with joy. Pulling into the station, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. There were no other cars in sight, and the only sound was the gentle hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I parked my car and stepped out, feeling a shiver run down my spine as I surveyed the empty pumps. As I walked towards the convenience store, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air seemed to crackle with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I pushed open the door to the store and stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling softly. The inside of the store was just as empty as the outside. Shelves lined with snacks and drinks sat untouched, and there was no sign of any employees. I called out, but my voice echoed through the empty store, unanswered. Feeling a growing sense of unease, I decided to grab a snack and pay for my gas quickly. I hurried to the cash register, but when I looked down, my heart stopped cold. There, sitting behind the counter, was a figure hunched over, its back to me. It was completely still, as if frozen in place. I couldn't see its face, but something about the way it sat sent chills down my spine. I called out, "Hello?" my voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't move, didn't even acknowledge my presence. I felt a surge of panic rise up inside me as I fumbled for my wallet, desperate to get out of there as quickly as possible. But as I reached for the cash register, the figure suddenly stood up, its movements jerky and unnatural. I froze, my hand still outstretched as I watched in horror as it turned towards me. That's when I saw its face. Or rather, what should have been its face. There was nothing there, just a gaping black void where its features should have been. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest, as I realized I was face to face with something otherworldly. Without thinking, I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty store. I burst through the door and sprinted towards my car, my mind racing with fear and confusion. As I peeled out of the gas station, I glanced back in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure chasing after me. But the station was empty, just like before, the only sign of life the dim glow of the fluorescent lights. I drove for hours. The image of the faceless figure burned into my mind. I never stopped for gas again that night, too afraid of what I might encounter in the darkness. And even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that whatever I saw that night is still out there, waiting for its next victim.